Imagine being a 7-year-old boy playing in your Christian village in the Balkans. One day, Ottoman officials arrive, not for taxes or tribute. They're here for you. You're taken, and you'll never see your family again. The Ottoman Empire lasted over 6 centuries across 3 continents. We remember its architecture, powerful sultans, and military genius. But behind that golden veneer lay sexual practices so twisted that contemporary observers struggled even to record them. These weren't isolated crimes. They were institutional, organized strategies that turned human sexuality into a weapon, tools of exploitation, coercion, and terror. Today, drawing on Ottoman records, eyewitness reports, and archaeological findings, we explore how an empire systemized sexual control. If you value dark but rigorously documented history, subscribe and let us know where you're watching from. Now let's begin. The most psychologically devastating system was the devşirme, or blood tax. Every few years, Ottoman officials swept through Christian villages, meticulously prepared, armed with lists, quotas, and spreadsheets, targeting young boys aged 4 to 20. They weren't just taken away. Officials inspected them like prized livestock, evaluating health, intelligence, looks, then marched them to palace or training barracks. At the palace, conversion to Islam wasn't choice. It was enforced. Their names were changed. Families and languages were erased. Any memory of their past life was beaten out of them. Within months, they became blank slates for the empire's will. Some joined the Janissary Corps, the elite imperial infantry, honorable, yes, but celibate. Their bonds were forged through controlled sexual culture, institutionalized homoerotic relationships managed by a special unit known as the Sift Olur, the partner unit. Sexual submission became tied to rank and privilege. The most beautiful boys weren't made soldiers. They became eunuchs, underwent brutal castration processes, often in distant lands like Egypt or Ethiopia. 90% died. The survivors lived as palace fixtures, black eunuchs for guarding women, white eunuchs in administrative roles, stripped of sexual and personal autonomy forever. But even that wasn't the worst fate. In palace courts, boy kutch dancers performed feminized dances, dressed as women, while violent patrons fought over them, sometimes attempting sexual assault. The crowds turned their bodies into dangerous public spectacle. Another covert system, Tavşan Oğlanlar, bunny boys, involved Christian boys used in secret top-tier sexual servitude for high-ranking officials. They held no status, no record, no hope. These weren't cultural quirks. They were institutionalized child sexual slavery. The empire's reach extended further into female bodies. Constantinople's slave markets operated like corporations. Women were categorized, priced, sold, especially the coveted odalisques, trained in luxurious sexual service. Prices soared for youth, virginity, beauty. Merchants kept ledgers, listing these women like livestock. Free women were protected in law, but enslaved women were property. Rape wasn't a crime if the victim was a slave, just a fine. The child of a slave was the slave owner's property. The imperial harem, often romanticized, was in reality a vicious, competitive environment. Women were forced to degrade one another, risking punishment, isolation, or even death if they failed to entertain or please. Some were even killed when they aged out of favor. And newborn mixed-race children born to enslaved concubines were often murdered to maintain racial hierarchy. In many cases, infanticide was the policy. Legal frameworks reinforced these horrors. Rape of a free woman meant death, justified punishment. Rape of a slave, minor fine. That economic hierarchy made sexual violence not just tolerated but encouraged. Worse, the empire ritualized sexual violence as entertainment. Prisoners were tortured sexually in public festivals, mock trials mirrored their crimes in grotesque spectacles, and crowds cheered as victims were humiliated. Body mutilation, especially sexual mutilation, was used to terrify and enforce dominance. Archaeology tells the rest. Skeletal remains from execution sites bear evidence of sexual mutilation. These were not crimes. These were state-endorsed acts of domination. But the real horror was normalization. Children grew up seeing human trafficking on streets. Belief systems taught that sexual slavery of infidels was righteous. Resistance was considered sin. Parents beat their own children to make them undesirable to imperial collectors. The machinery behind this, record-keeping, financing, bureaucratic detail, shows how deeply embedded sexual exploitation was in Ottoman governance. Foreign diplomats wrote about it, but downplayed it as cultural difference, trading silence for commerce. As the empire fell, these practices didn't vanish. They evolved, hidden within successor regimes, persisting psychologically for generations. The trauma destroyed the possibility of normal intimacy across generations. Children could not bond. Women once exploited couldn't emotionally recover. Empathy died. The Ottoman Empire may have ended in 1922, but its legacy of sexual exploitation echoes on. This wasn't distant folklore. It lasted centuries, with surviving records, graves, and voices that demand remembrance. This isn't about modern politics. It's about human dignity. It's about recognizing how power can debase intimacy and how societies can normalize the unthinkable. If we don't confront these horrors in full, we risk repeating them in new forms. Let's make sure the millions who suffered are not forgotten.